you want to be happy for the rest of your life, come up to the top of the rock. It's the grandest spot in Ireland, and it's full of the real old stock. No matter what your past may be, if you haven't the price of a block, they'll never see you down and out above at the top of the rock. That's a verse of a poem by the late and great Ned Drummond. Of course, Ned Drummond came from this part of Tralee town, the top of the rock, and we're here today to pay homage to a great Kerry man and a great footballer that was spawned in this part of Tralee town. We're here now at the foot of Listellic in Tralee, where, of course, and at this point in time I'd like to thank the Austin Stacks great historian Tim Slattery for his help in making this video this morning. And of course, a well-known pictorial historian of the Austin Stacks Football Club in Tralee is Adrian McLaughlin. Between Tim with his written history and Adrienne with her pictorial history of the Austin Stacks football team that resides in this area in Tralee, they keep great records of the club, and I thank them for all their help in the making of this video this morning about this great Kerry man. And one would ask, what makes a great Kerry man? Well, a great Kerry man, of course, never grows old, has a sense of humour, quick-witted, a great storyteller and raconteur, interested in sport and all-round good egg. And 'tis of such a man I come to talk this morning. And most importantly, a good Kerry man is one who'll make you laugh even 10 years after he's dead, bring a smile to your face. And that's the case in the man we've come to pay homage to today. In Tralee, in footballing circles, this man is quoted for his quick-witted sayings more often than William Shakespeare. It is said that he once told one of his managers of the football team he was playing with, he said, "Put me on the 40-yard line," he said, "and build a team around me." In only such a humble way as this man could. We're here standing at the roundabout, and in Tralee there are many roads such as John Joe Sheehy Road and Dan Spring Road, and roundabouts after great men. There's the Joe Cahan roundabout, another great football player who played for another part of the town. And it might be important just to say at this juncture there are 4 teams in Tralee, 4 sections of the town that have football teams, but 3 of those were born out of the revolution, the struggle for freedom. The Rock Street branch of the old IRA and the Mitchell's branch and the Strand Road branch, they were born out of clubs that were formed originally to take part in the revolution. And Austin Stack, of course, whom the club we'll talk about today is named after, he was one of the leaders of the Rock Street branch of the IRA at that time, back in the 1900s, around the time of the 1916 Rising, 1910 and that kind of time, when these clubs were formed. And when this man was asked, "Why do you think they named the longest road in Tralee after you?" he would say, "Well, I suppose they named the longest after the greatest." And of course the man of whom we speak is the great Martin Bracker O'Regan. And in speaking of Bracker O'Regan today, and one might wonder where he got the name Bracker, and thanks to Tim Slattery, of course. Tim said that he had a kick so strong that he would break the back of the net, and that's where he got his name. Of course, it started off as Breaker, and then it went to Break, and then it went, of course, it was in the fast way of Kerry speaking, it turned to Bracker, and that's the name he carried for the 95 years of his life. from 1909 to 2005 when he died, 15 years ago. The skies are grey over the town of Tralee in County Kerry in Southern Ireland today, but I hope I lift the blue skies or the grey skies of your life today and turn them blue with stories of the Austin Stacks Football Club and the great Bracker O'Regan. Some days I have lunch in the Greyhound Bar in Tralee, of course, with the great Austin Stacks mentor and former chairman Aidan O'Connor, Aidan's Bar, and the talk is always of football, and even though I don't have a great knowledge or interest in football, I'm a great listener to a story, and the stories are marvellous. And the question is often asked, how many All-Ireland medals are held by the Austin Stacks Football Club players since its formation? And the answer is 92. And when I was preparing for this video, I learned that that is not the right answer. Senior footballs held by the Austin Stacks Football Club in Tralee amount to 150. And I'll tell you why. Greyhounds were another great love of Bracker O'Regan's, and Martin came here several nights a week up until the time he was almost until the day he died. For 95 years he was coming here. Of course, he was born only 1 field away from here, and he had greyhounds himself, and he would come here in the latter days when he was too old to keep a greyhound, but he'd come here weekly, and he'd come with a great friend of his, John Moynihan from Killerisk in Tralee. And John, of course, was they were also great card players. If there was a table set in a kitchen around the county and the cloth put out for a game of cards and the deck taken out, Bracker and John would be there. And John was a great companion of Bracker's for many years. And Bracker's son told me he came here one night shortly before he died with him, and someone met him and he said, "God, Bracker," he said, "I thought you were dead." "Well, if I was," said Bracker, "I didn't see you at my funeral." His wit was that quick, his retort. We're here, of course, at Urban Terrace in Tralee, that gives its name to this street because of the amount of All-Ireland medals held here. And it's fondly known locally as the Street of Champions. There's 20 houses here, and of course the poem I quoted from earlier on was a quote by a poem by Ned Drummond. Ned, of course, came out of the second house here, the second last house. Number 1 is at the far end of the street, and number 20 is here. And in this terrace of houses, 20 houses alone, there are 20 All-Ireland senior football medals. In the 20 houses, 22 All-Ireland senior football medals, and we'll be back later to tell you who won them. And just to explain the significance of an All-Ireland football medal, it would be like winning a Super Bowl ring or a World Series if you were in America, or if you were in England, an FA Cup final medal. And of course Bracker has 2 All-Ireland medals to his count. He contributed to winning of many of the 22 that's held in this terrace. We're here standing now at the Mike O'Donnell, my namesake's mural of the great Stacks player and Kerry player Kieran Donaghy. And of course Kieran Donaghy is another great Stacks player. And of course the quote on the wall is, "What do you think about that?" A quote by Kieran Donaghy to the great football pundit Joe Brolly, who in one of the years Kerry were playing in All-Ireland didn't give them a hope of winning, and when they won, Kieran said to him, "No, well, Joe Brolly, what do you think about that?" And that reminds me of another saying about Bracker, of course. In 1939, during the 30s, the Kerry football team went to America on a few occasions, and one of the occasions was the time of the World's Fair in New York. And The great former heavyweight champion of the world, Jack Dempsey, was to throw in the ball, a privilege normally reserved for dignitaries of the church. Usually it's the local bishop who throws in the ball at big football games. But this time Jack Dempsey was throwing in the ball. And Bracker, of course, always believed that nowadays the rules and regulations are too soft. They protect the goalkeeper and everybody else. And that time Bracker said if you were put on the forward line in a football game, you were almost given a license to kill. It was every man for himself. And with that in mind, he was talking to Jack Dempsey before Jack Dempsey threw in the ball in Yankee Stadium, and he was asked after what did he say to Jack Dempsey. Well, he said, Jack Dempsey, he said to Jack Dempsey, turn your back and throw in the ball. He gave the advice to Dempsey, and Dempsey said, what'll I do then? He said, run for your life, he said, because you'll get killed in the scuffle. I'm come to Lower Rock Street now here too, and I'm opposite the shop belonging to Dinah Fitzgerald, of course. The shop was run lately by the Fitzgerald family and way back, and great Republican house and a great footballing house. And of course Dinah was the place to go in the Rock, and was recently run by Dennis Fitzgerald. Dennis, of course, worked later in Shaw's, retired a short time ago, but this was a great house for talking football and everything else. And I'm reminded of a story told to me by Seamus O'Mahony, the great Radio Kerry sports reporter, and died in the wool rockman and Austin Stacks member. And Seamus told me one day of a story that Bracker Regan met the great Purty Landers, another one of the players that he played with, and Purty, then retired, was on his way home having bought the meat for the dinner for his wife, and he had it in a bag. And Bracker and himself were talking, and of course, as talking goes in this part of Kerry, the conversation went on into an hour and a half, and eventually somebody joined in the conversation, and Purty saw his opportunity to escape, and he went in there to Dinah Fitzgerald's for a loaf of bread. And if he did, about 2 minutes after, Bracker came in, and having been talking outside the door for an hour and a half, they passed each other in the shop. And when Purty went out, Dinah Fitz turned to Bracker and he said, you talk to Purty at all? Oh God, says Bracker, I don't talk to any of the Landers. He said, I haven't talked to them in years. And why, how come, says Dinah, falling into the trap of the story. He said, Bracker turned to him and said, you know, when we were playing football, he said, they were always shouting me, Bracker, pass the ball, pass the ball. In the end, he said, I got sick of it. I told them, if they wanted the ball, get the ball themselves. Needless to say, Dinah told everybody that came into the shop that day, and the story spread around the town. And of course, that story has gone into the annals of footballing folklore. Of course, I have mentioned that this area of Rock Street, Upper Rock Street, was a hotbed of revolution in 1917. It was when they formed this club over 100 years ago. It was a hotbed of republicanism and football, sport. They say if you cut men down the middle here, on one side you'll find the colours of the Austin Stacks Football Club, black and amber, and on the other side you'll see green and gold. We're here now outside one of the 4 shops that in the 50s, when I was growing up, was here, and the 60s was here in Rock Street. It's now the only one left since that time. Kevin Barry's, of course, always great Austin Stacks supporters, and we're here early in the morning. Deliveries are being made to this famous shop, and of course Kevin himself played for the Austin Stacks football. The roundabout further down the street named in his memory. Standing at the door of Kevin Barry's shop, of course, synonymous with Rock Street, one of the great Kerry and Austin Stacks football players, Paddy Whacker Moriarty. And of course Paddy Whacker Moriarty has an All-Ireland club championship medal. I'm here now in Connolly Park in Tralee, looking in through the railings. Because of the lockdown, everything is locked up. and I'm looking at the clubhouse for the Austin Stacks Football Club. This is their final resting place, if you like, where they have a wonderful facility here. And I'm looking at another of the artist Mike O'Donnell's murals, and of course it begs me to ask the question, what would Bracker Regan think of this mural if he saw it? And someone might say, are you in the mural, Bracker? And of course he'd say, who do you think is going up for the ball? Only the Bracker. And now, during the week, I did ask somebody who were the influential women in the formation of this club and the making of this club what it is, because to discount the women is to do so at your peril, because I'm living in a house with 4 women, and of course the significance of women to the club, total medal count here of 150, as I explained earlier, 92 have been got by the men of the club in the over 100 years of its existence. But in the last 30 years, since the women's game became popular, the women of this club have gathered a total of 58 medals. And the influential women in this club were Noreen Power, the late Helen Dowling, Benny Keeve, mother of Ger and Anthony O'Keefe, who played for this club, and of course Father Tomas O'Keefe and the late Anne Gallivan, Pauline Barrett, she's the niece-in-law of the man who, in whose honour the club is named, Austin Stack, Doreen Shukru, and of course among the names of the women who were influential in the club, the name Moss Carroll comes up. And of course you have to ask the question, what's the name of Moss Carroll, who's a man, in amongst all the women? Well, apparently I was told that were it not for the encouragement and support of Moss Carroll here at the early days of the development of the women's game, the success of the women in this club wouldn't be as it is today. The count of 58 medals would be much lower. Moss, of course, and later his son Kevin, managed the ladies football team here to their first county championship. And I was told when it started first, and I was told this by a woman member of the club, that in the early days when they were kicking the football around here, it was like a scene out of a Benny Hill television program. He said they were all chasing the ball around until Moss turned them into the force that they are today, and he honed them into a really good football team that won 9 county championships in a row, and many in all Ireland, 58 in total. And of course, in mentioning women, you have to mention some of the great players. Del McLaughlin-White, and she has 7 All-Ireland medals to her total, 7 senior All-Ireland medals. And Del, of course, who was, of course, a little reticent to mention all the honours she has. She also is involved in basketball, athletics, refereeing. She was described to me as being a great all-rounder, a great member of this famous club. Marina Barry Walsh, who has 9 All-Ireland medals, senior. And of course, 5 medals are held by Anne O'Callaghan Eager from just across the road in Casements Avenue. And these girls, of course, the honours don't stop there, but those 3 women were involved in the 9 in a row county championship medals. And this all as a result of the work of Moss Carroll and his son Kevin in the early days of when football was being nurtured here, the women's football was being nurtured here in this club. And again, I just like to mention another woman, the sister-in-law of Del White, Adrian McLaughlin. Adrian, of course, he keeps a pictorial record of the events in this club over the last 30-40 years. And just once more before we leave this iconic club grounds, Tim Slattery, the oral historian of this famous club and football in Kerry in general and nationally. And of course we're steeped in this area in local sporting lore: dogs, horses, pigeons, anything where there's a bet to be laid. And that reminds me of another story of the great Bracker Regan, of course, and the story of Bracker and the leprechaun. And one evening long ago, back in the early 50s, when Bracker lived in the Drumtacker area of Tralee, up near the Forge Cross on the Listowel Road, and Bracker was coming home one winter's evening from work. They were, I think, building the houses in Marion Park in Tralee, and Bracker was on his way home in his pocket he had a bag of sweets for his kids. He always did that on a payday on a Friday evening on the way home, and he heard music coming out from over a ditch in Ballybeggin, near Ballybeggin Racecourse. And if he did, he looked in over the wall, and inside he saw a leprechaun playing music. So he snuck up as only Bracker could do and grabbed the leprechaun in his left hand. Of course, Bracker was ambidextrous, left or right was no problem to him. So he had hold of the leprechaun, and the leprechaun was screaming, "Let me go, let me go." And Bracker said, "Not before I get 3 wishes. "No," said the leprechaun, "you're out of luck." He said, "I've been caught twice before, I've only 1 wish left." So Bracker wished for the newspaper for the following weekend with the racing results for Saturday in the paper. So next thing, the paper appeared in his hand, and he left the leprechaun go, and off he ran home, brought down the eye lamp and lit it. There was no electricity in the house, and opened the pages of the newspaper laid out on the kitchen table in front of him, and he read the emblazoned headlines on the paper: "Racing cancelled due to bad weather." Standing here opposite the now redundant CWS bacon factory in Tralee, where one of Bracker Regan's brothers worked, Thomas. And it reminds me of a story about Thomas, that he was here one morning, and of course he loved nothing better than a flutter on the horses. And of course he was the opposite to Bracker. Bracker was outgoing, and Thomas was a bit more reserved. A spiritual man, did a lot of work for the local church, but he was hiding away in a back storeroom looking at the paper, checking the racing for that evening. Bracker had his head buried in the newspaper, and when the boss came in, Mr. John Power, and of course Mr. Power said to Thomas, he said, "Thomas, what are you doing there?" Meaning work. And Thomas looked up from the paper and he said, "Piggott has a horse going at the 5 o'clock race at Epsom." He said, "I think I'll have a few quid in him." And as we looked down Rock Street from the co-ops there, down there, a great footballer from this area, Pedlar Sweeney, came from. Another story about Thomas was that he had a friend, a fellow by the name of Governor Quirk, and Governor went off to fight in the Spanish Civil War, and when Governor went away, Thomas owed him 2 shillings, and while Governor was away, it was playing on Thomas's mind that he owed Governor 2 shillings, and of course word came back that Ger Quirk was killed in Spain, and of course then Thomas was suffering from anxiety because he hadn't paid the Governor his 2 shillings, so he went to a local priest for advice, as Thomas was very involved in the Catholic Young Men's Society in the church. And the priest said, "Look," he said, "why don't you get 2 masses said? And in the Catholic religion, when people die, we pray that their souls will go to paradise." So he decided he'd get 2 masses said in the Dominican church in Tralee. And later, after 1939, when the Spanish Civil War was over, Governor Quick appeared back in Tralee. Apparently the rumours about him were associated with a Ger Quirk from Killarney. He arrived back hale and hearty, and of course Thomas was in a bit of a quandary at that stage because he hadn't his 2 shillings to pay Governor Quirk. So he met Governor and he said, "Governor," he said, "about that 2 shillings I owe you." Well, he said, "There's 2 masses coming to you in the Dominican Church." We're back here now at Urban Terrace in Rock Street, the terrace of houses that gives its name to the Street of Champions. And speaking earlier of 1939 and Thomas O'Regan, there is another 1939 connection to this story. And Tralee, and that is of course that the World's Fair in 1939, when the Kerry team went to America, an artist exhibited at that World's Fair by the name of Michael Keating, and Michael Keating painted the Stations of the Cross for St. John's Catholic Church here in Tralee, and he won a gold medal at that World's Fair for his art. And as I said, the medal count for this terrace alone of 20 houses is 22, and I'll give it to you now. Mike O'Dyle, 5. John Joe Purty Landers, 5. Tim Roundy Landers, 5. Jimmy Goxie Gorman, 3. Bill Landers, 2. And John Gal Slattery, 1. And of course Bill Goxie Gorman's father also won an All-Ireland medal. There are very few connections left in this housing estate, of course. The last house there, number 20, was the house of Billy Tansley and his wife Chris. Of course, Billy was instrumental in bringing down and out Irishmen home from England and housing them in houses in Tralee in their twilight years. And Billy, of course, has a terrace of houses named after him in the Strand Road area of Tralee, Tansley Court. During the Kerry team's visit to New York in 1939 during the World's Fair, there was an occasion where some of the men could have gone on a parachute jump. It was an attraction at the World's Fair at the time, and much like we'd consider a bungee jump nowadays. And that night at the meal they were discussing the dangers, of course, of a parachute jump, and somebody asked Bracker, "What would you do if the parachute didn't open?" If the parachute didn't open, Bracker said, "Well then, you'll get your money back." And he turned to the fella next to him and he said, "Pass the salt." Another connection left on this street at that time, 100 years ago, is Myra Sheehan, who is a niece of the great Landers brothers. Myra still lives here in this terrace. I'm sitting here now on a wall in what is now St. Brendan's Church, where they brought Bracker on his final journey, as he made his final journey to here in 2005. And we're across the road from where Bracker was born, in a place called Gallows Green in Tralee. And we have a saying in Ireland that when somebody is full of roguery and devilment and is a great character, we call them a hangman. And I suppose Bracker was a hangman. And I suppose where else would you find a hangman only in Gallows Green? And as I look around, I'm reminded that on his debut game for Kerry, he scored 3 goals and 3 points, which stands still as a record from play. Nothing from frees or penalties, they were all out of his hand from out the field. And there is a dispute about another goal, a 4th. He should have got a 4th, but was attributed to the great Mike O'Dyle. And someone asked Bracker one time, "What did you argue about it?" "You know," said Bracker, "I wanted to boost his morale." He said it was good for the team. And as I look down the Street of Champions, I am reminded of a song by the great rock and roller Jerry Lee Lewis, in which one line reads, "One by one they turned out the light." And that indeed they did. All the lights have gone out, and Bracker's light finally went out on the week of Cheltenham 2005, ironically enough. Along with Bracker's 2 senior All-Ireland medals, he had 1 junior medal, 3 county championship medals, 30, 31 and 36, and 2 senior hurling county medals, 29 and 31. Not only was he a good footballer, he was also a good hurler. As I stand here in this hallowed ground of Johnny Connell's field, where Martin Bracker Regan and those who followed him in the Stacks Football Club did most of their football playing, now stands the Our Lady in St. Brendan's Church, and we're reminded of the last verse of the iconic poem by Ned Drummond. And last but best of all our gifts was our mother's love for prayer. At Holy Mass each morning you would always find them there, and if you were passing home at night between 9 and 10 o'clock, you would always hear the rosary said at the top of the rock. And I think Martin Bracker Regan was best summed up in a tribute to him that appeared on the Stacks newsletter at the occasion of his death. And it said, he was born on Thursday the 19th of August 1909 and died on Monday the 14th of March 2005. No one ever regarded him as old, as up to the end he had maintained a marvellous enthusiasm for life in general and for sport in particular. He was blessed with great health of mind and body, and you couldn't find better company to be part of than Martin Bracker Regan. When I started out, I asked what made a great Kerry man, and one of the great attributes of a great Kerry man is that he can make you laugh 10 years after he's dead. Nothing 15 years after his death and the words, "Do you remember Martin Bracker Regan?" brings a smile to my face and the face of many others. And I leave you with the words of this song by Jerry Lee Lewis. We'll meet again, another place, another time.